Welcome to Tea Time with Shayleigh Amber. I'm Shayleigh Evans, and I'm a life coach for pets and their people. I'm a truth seeker, and it's my passion to empower others and to give animals a voice along the way.
I'm Amber Leidick, and I've been a performance horse trainer focused on behavioral issues for over 20 years. My current passion is creating impactful in-person and online events and collaborating with professionals to be on the leading edge of positive change in the horse industry.
We are two friends invested in theta healing, belief system work, animal communication, and any resources that benefit human-animal partnerships. So turn up the volume and let's dive into the Great Awakening, brought to you by our horses. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are super excited to be talking with Shea Stewart. If you have not heard of her before, she's an equine and human biodynamic craniosacral practitioner. She's a teacher. She's got online classes and in-person classes. She has some really cool blog posts on her website. And also, if I'm not mistaken, you also study the equine eye as well, right?
Yes, equine iridology.
That's so awesome. I love that because I love all things energy, and I feel like the eye is the window to the soul, and it just blends everything together.
Yes, for sure.
So, what was your journey like for maybe those who don't know who you are? Like, how'd you get to this point? What brought you to craniosacral therapy? Can you give us a little background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on. It's such a pleasure to be here. My background started probably around 1989 when I had my very first craniosacral session on myself. And I was suffering from migraines and I had some neck pain, and I had just moved to San Francisco, and my sister was a professional ballet dancer, and they always were getting all kinds of body work, and they were up on things like that. And this was before massages were really a thing, or even chiropractic. And my sister said, "You have to go see this woman. She's amazing." And so I thought, okay, I'll try it. And I had no idea what she was doing because it was so gentle, but it just sent me to this other realm. And I felt truly seen for the first time in many years. And I started to realize that my symptoms that I went in for were a it was more of a symptom of a dysfunctional nervous system. And having the craniosacral brought me back into myself. I was pretty, I guess you could say, not really shut down, but more in like a freeze state from some trauma when I was a little girl. My mother was killed, and then I had some emotional stuff after that. And um, craniosacral kind of opened this door for me to get back to who I was before all of this happened. And it really started a whole path of healing that I had at the time, I had no idea that I even needed. So it was always a form of body work that I would seek out. And it was a little hard to find back then after this woman moved away. It was not easy to find a craniosacral practitioner. So, but I did, and it was something I kept up with whenever I had an injury or an accident or something, or I just felt like I needed it. I would go find somebody. And then the equine work came when I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I had a training barn, and I taught lessons and clinics, and I started horses under saddle and I had a lot of troubled horses come. So I did a rehab type training, and I would always host clinics from all anytime I wanted to learn something, I would just host a clinic. So I learned barefoot trimming and nutrition and all kinds of, I would have horsemanship people and Peggy Cummings and all kinds of people. And I had somebody come who taught equine craniosacral. And I took some of her stuff and then played with it just on the training horses. And the changes were phenomenal. And I couldn't understand because I didn't really know what I was doing. And the training was very basic. And I started seeing changes that really struck my interest to want to learn it on a deeper level. And just through word of mouth, I started venturing off my little place and working on friends' horses. And then I ended up traveling all over California and I would do craniosacral all over the state. And then I ended up moving to Texas. And the first thing I did when I got here was look up a craniosacral practitioner near me. And I found somebody who was 15 minutes away and he taught classes. He taught human classes and he was trained from osteopaths and there's different modalities of craniosacral. There's different approaches to it, and he had studied all of them, but specialized in what's called biodynamic craniosacral. And he let me take his classes. They were for humans, even though I wasn't a licensed massage therapist. He let me come take the classes, and I ended up doing a 2-year advanced course with him. And it completely changed my equine work. And I've done other equine trainings such as dissections and anatomy training and myofascial and all kinds of different modalities. But that's pretty much it. And then I still continue because I love the biodynamic approach. It just keeps going deeper and deeper the further you get in the training. And I still take classes because I enjoy them and I enjoy learning. And now that there's so many people doing it online, it's easy to,
Mm-hmm.
take a class here and there.
That's so cool. I'm a serial class taker as well. I love learning. I have so many books and I'm always down different like right now I'm like in Chinese medicine and then I'm reading a craniosacral book and I'm all over the place. I'm curious, do you so I know you're talking about a lot of your education, but have you had like a certain horse that was a turning point for you, or like how do you balance the scientific side of things and your human mind versus what the horses are teaching you and telling you?
Um, I don't know if there was a specific horse that was a turning point. Um, I had so many troubled horses when I started it that were in my facility, and they were all making these interesting changes that, like there was one little horse who he would head shake sometimes, and when you would ask him from a walk to a trot, he would just get really tight. And I I was specialized in getting horses stable and calm and present. That was the one thing I was really good at. Um, and I couldn't reach this horse, and I did one cranial session, and he was completely changed. So there was quite a few instances like that. Um, and the way I balance it with, you mean like our cultural thinking of Western medicine versus something like craniosacral? Is that what you mean?
So I guess my question is more around honoring free will, and I think it's just because I'm thinking about like how this intertwines with what I do as an animal communicator. And I have so many horses lately that have been like talking about this great awakening where it's this shift away from human entitlement to the state of their horses. So I feel like sometimes as humans, especially, I talk to a lot of clients who learn body work, and there can sometimes be an imbalance of what we perceive is going on in the body and going into fix it mode rather. And I think that's what I love about craniosacral. From my outside perspective, it seems like something where the body really has to guide you and you really have to be in tune with the horse. And so I guess from that perspective is what I'm asking.
Well, this is where the biodynamic craniosacral shines because we focus on the health and the system. So we don't come in with a preconceived notion of, I always get the laundry list of what's wrong with the horse. And then I try to change it around, like, what do you love about your horse? What's going well with your horse? And when we work on a horse, or when I work on a horse, we orient to the health and the system. So we don't orient to what's wrong and trying to fix that. We focus on what's flowing correctly and expanding the health and reminding the body that it does have this innate health working at all times inside. We all do. And so it's really important to widen our view and not zero in on what's wrong. As humans, we're really good at getting tunnel vision and zeroing in and want to fix issues. And it's not really up to us to determine what needs to be fixed. It's the body. The body knows what needs to be fixed. So in my work, I'm just providing a safe place for it to go, oh, okay, I remember what wholeness felt like. And then the body starts unraveling layers of issues that don't belong there. And whatever it wants to unravel that day is not really my decision. It's the body's decision. And I have a lot of examples just with myself because I continue to get worked on myself. And I'll go in I went in one time, I tell this story in my classes because it's so hard to get us to shift our perception of wanting to fix things. And I did uh, that podcast seminar last year. I think it was last year. And that was really hard for me to be around that many people at once and, get up and talk in front of people. It's not something that I'm used to doing, at least not that big of a crowd. And it was very stressful for my nervous system. And when I got home, about a week later, my back was so bad. It was really hard just to go from a sitting position to a standing position. And so I thought, well, I'll go get some cranial. I'll go get a session. And I went in there and she had her hand somewhere. I don't remember, somewhere on my back and maybe my occiput or something. And my body started doing this unwinding thing and my jaw started, how like those wind up teeth that chatter across the desk. That's what my jaw started doing in the session. And she was like, has this ever happened before? And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And she was like, just let it go. Just let your body do what it needs to do. And it was just, it was like releasing shock in my system. And my jaw would chatter and my head would move around and my jaw would chatter again and my head would move around. And this went on for 40 minutes. And finally, when you have the hiccups and you hit that point and you're like, am I going to have another hiccup? You're trying to stay calm to get rid of them. It was like that. It was like, is it going to come back? And it finally stopped, and I felt like my whole body just went just this decompression. And I got up and my back pain was completely gone. And and she never even touched my back. So that's a situation where maybe I could have gone into, an orthopedic surgeon and they would look at my back, which probably is a mess just from years of training horses. And something, they probably would have found something wrong, but that wasn't why it was painful. So it's just an example of how we can't narrow our focus in on these issues. And our body, I look at our bodies, and in the biodynamic work, we look at our bodies as fluid. So if you think about molecularly, we're 99% fluid, and our fluid has an intelligence. And this intelligence is there from the moment we enter into our physical form. And in the biodynamic work, we study a lot of embryology because the forces that form us and shape us when we're an embryo are the same forces that's working inside of us as adults. So this is the fluid body that we work on, and it's like orienting to the deeper stabilizing rhythms, a deeper body that knows, if that
Wow.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And Amber and I have both had craniosacral, and I don't think I fully understood. I feel like you can't really fully understand until you get it done on yourself, because I remember getting it done on my horse and I could see all the twitching and stuff. And I'm like, this is so interesting. Like, she must be doing energy work or whatever. And it was a similar scenario. My horse was having an issue with the hind end, and she's like, oh, we need to go to the TMJ. And at the time I was like, what? Okay, that's interesting. And when I got it on myself, I love that you said it was like you were being seen for the first time, because I thought I was going in for like chronic headaches, chronic neck pain, chronic SI pain. Meanwhile, I'm like releasing all this trauma from my childhood. It's like I got like this life lesson of like childhood trauma and the first time I ever didn't feel lovable and where that got stuck in my body. And her hands were like on my temples like the whole time, and my feet were going crazy, and I was like, why is it in my feet? So it's pretty amazing how the body, knows what it needs. And I know Amber has had similar experiences where we're just like, how is this a thing? But if you think about it from a fluid perspective, it makes so much sense. And I love your outlook on seeing what's good first. Amber and I like to talk a lot about vibrational energy and how, especially like in animal communication, and how like you have to raise your energy to a certain vibration to really align with the truth of a horse and to get your own stuff out of the way. And if you're constantly seeing what's wrong, how are you ever going to be aligned with what's good? But if you align your energy with something that is good and positive, that love and that energy and that higher vibrating emotion can expand. So I love this whole conversation.
Yeah, I do too. I love talking about this stuff because it's we're born with all these senses, and our brain learns to filter out things just through enculturation and how we're taught to be and what we're taught to focus on. But there's so much more out there that we don't know. And the cranial work is just, when I teach people, I tell them, people always want to learn more, learn more, when's the next class? But I like to really stretch them out and not let them take a class for at least 6 months. because it's not about teaching more contacts. You know, you can teach where to put your hands, and you can teach more places and more places, but it's about developing a felt sense and a deeper perception and a deep listening skill. And that's something that just takes time. We're born with it, but we lose it over time. It's like a part of our brain that becomes dormant because we're not used to walking through life that way.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, I didn't know that you were. I'm in Aptos right now, so that's
Oh, cool.
interesting. I was like, oh, Santa Cruz Mountains. Um, and that I also started out as a problem horse trainer, and that shift from understanding it was so much more than being able to just make them look a certain way that the person that brought the horse to me wanted them to look like and act like and then hand them back. And then it was sort of similar where I had a bunch of stuff fall apart in my life. And then all of a sudden the horses were like, okay, you're ready to learn more. And I remember the first time that I watched someone do Masterson, and it kind of clicked in my head that I was like, oh, like body work isn't just about making a horse feel better. Like it's not like a luxury spa day. I was like, oh my gosh. And it's so, I always say it's so embarrassing because how many years I spent 15 at least years training horses. And it took me that long to actually like connect the fact that that stuff was directly related to their behaviors. It's wild, but I feel like so many people still, as horse trainers, live from that perspective. Like you're always just looking at the horse from like an outside in and never diving into this like, oh, there's this entire world going on inside that's affecting all of these other things. But it was just, it's so interesting that you can spend that long and not know. Because now I look at it, I'm like, well, obviously, but it's not common knowledge. And as horse trainers, it's not like you have to go through this certain certification to understand the stuff before you go out into the world and start manipulating horses' bodies with knowing nothing about them. So I feel like it's just such an I love that you're doing the both the horse and the people because I think for someone to fully understand how to hold the space and do that work for the horse, they have to understand what it is to receive it, within themselves. So I love that you're doing both. That's amazing, and I love that.
Yeah, it's very important, especially when you do this kind of work. Self-care is very important. But I enjoy working on people as well because it's a different people's I love working on the horses because they just live in a quieter space and they're more grounded. They live in the slower rhythms. And we can't help but be elevated just from the nature of how life is these days. I mean, just driving to the grocery store can get your stress level up. And so it's interesting to work on people and then get the verbal feedback. And
Mm.
the horses give feedback in different ways. And a lot of people who go through my classes, it's fun to watch them um, shift and start to hear. Horses are highly intuitive and they live in such a huge heart space. And it's interesting to watch them. The longer you do this type of work, you start to hear the horses on a different level. And it's a lot like animal communication. You hear stuff, you see stuff. And even during the cranial work, there's times where like I'll get a vision of something, like I mean, it can be anything, like a accident or a sense of grief or a vision of the horse um, doing something or somebody doing something to the horse. And a lot of times when the owner is with me and I get these visions, it will be maybe 5 minutes. The owner will start talking about that situation without knowing that I had just seen it in my mind. So I think that's pretty cool that people are more intuitive than they give themselves credit. don't learn how to trust that. But every time somebody does that, I just love it because it's just a part of life that I think is really special, and we don't know how to embrace that.
Definitely. And I think through the work too, just just through people observing the softness of you working on their horses, I think has a shift because once I realized how soft you can be working with them, I have not taken a craniosacral class before, but I will like put my hands on 2 points of their body and just kind of like, I don't know, tune into it energetically. And I swear, I feel the energy like bouncing between my hands, and then it kind of like stops and they close their eyes, and I'm just like letting it happen. And I'll never forget one time this is maybe a couple years ago. I was already practicing animal communication, but I was still pretty disconnected from the body. I was still kind of in my ego a little bit about, the way a horse should look or whatever. And I remember like putting my hands on my horse and I had them on his shoulder, and he was like, no, your focus is like, you're too focused on my shoulder. The issue's in my spleen. And I was like, your spleen? Like, I just like felt it in his body. And when I allowed myself to just kind of like, I just remember my energy, like just being like, okay, the spleen, like, and just allowing it to go where it needed to. And then just got myself to a grounded place. And it's almost like I was witnessing it happening. Like I wasn't sending my energy to the spleen. I was just like seeing it go there, feeling it go there, or whatever. And he just started stretching his legs out and then he laid down. It was like such a cool thing. So I really can't wait to take one of your classes because I want to know, like, I'm someone who's like, no, I do want to know the hand placements, and then I'm gonna get like too intentional about it. And I'm curious, like, what your perspective is on intention, because I feel like a lot of times people, it's like a catchphrase, catchword where people will be like, my intentions were good, or if your intention is this, can you be too intentional with the craniosacral work, or do you have any thoughts around intention and this type of work?
Yes, absolutely. Um, it's more about the quality of your attention instead of your intention. Um, One of the things that I've learned about horses, and I started to get a sense of that when I was training. I would get horses in that were really troubled, and I noticed when I didn't focus on them, but I focused on either where I wanted to go and how I wanted us to feel while we were going there. That was more important than me focusing on them to try to get something done. And in doing the craniosacral work, one of the biggest things I learned in my classes, and that I've also learned with the horses, is they know where we're thinking. So what I teach people is to go through a cycle of attunement while you're working on the horse. And our before we even touch the horse, we have to make sure we're in a neutral space. And neutral doesn't mean without emotion or numb or not thinking, because that's, we're humans, we're having a human experience. Neutral just means that space in between our thoughts. So if you sit there quietly, you'll notice your thoughts. You'll have streams of thoughts. People are pretty busy in their mind with thinking. And then if you pay attention, there might be a little pause, and then the next thought will come through. And some people, that pause is like a flash, and others it's a little longer. And the more we start paying attention to that pause, the more we can settle into a more neutral place. So that is the first thing we have to do. And then when we actually touch the horse and we get into a mutual relational field together, I tell people to go through a cycle of attunement. So where and it can be anything. It can be think about your breath, then maybe think about the contact you're on, think about the bone, think about another part of the system, and then expand your awareness out. Think about the horizon, take it out far, and just cycle through these different places where your mind is. And a lot of times the horse will tell you where they want you to be. Either you'll just be drawn to it and everything gets real quiet and still, or they'll actually get fussy if you're thinking too strong about something within them, or you're too far out there or whatever. But they'll tell you where they want you to be mentally. And if they're not, if they're just cool with wherever, then I just tell people to keep rotating through that cycle. And I know for me, when I've gotten craniosacral and the practitioner is too narrow focused on the bone they're on, it's too much pressure for me. I've actually had to tell people to stop focusing so much on my sphenoid bone because it's too much pressure in my head. And the last woman that I did that, she was like, "How did you know?" But I could just feel it, it was just like being in a vice. But horses are really good with that. I had one that I worked on who he was a horse. He couldn't handle any type of body work, and they would have to actually put a muzzle on him to pull him out of his stall and tack him up. And so she thought she'd try craniosacral, and it really was a modality that worked for this horse. Like it was one of those horses, it was like a miracle shift. But one time I was working on him and I was on his, whatever, his temporal bones. And then I expanded out to the horizon and he'd start to get real fussy. And so I'd go back to his temporal bones and then he'd get quiet, and then I'd expand out to the horizon, he'd get fussy. And then it dawned on me, he wants me focused on his temporal bones. So I stayed there and he got really quiet. And I showed his owner to try to, because anybody can do this. You don't have to be a cranial practitioner. Um, and I showed her, I was like, okay, now I'm going to expand out. And as soon as I do that, he would get real fussy. And so they know. And if we know how to listen to that, then you can really develop a cool relationship with your horse.
So I have a topic that I want to talk about. I feel like I was gonna say it's controversial, but I don't feel like it's controversial. I just think that there's a lot of differing opinions around it. But teeth, because from like just the work that I do, I talk to a lot of horses, and I would say at least like 8 out of 10 have pain in their teeth, like or a headache of some sort. Like so many horses just have a headache or tooth pain, and they've gotten so good about communicating um angles. Like it's typically like an angle issue where they just feel like their teeth are not aligning. How often in your work, well, talk anything teeth that you want to talk about if that calls to you. Because I love the topic of teeth. And also I'm just curious, like how often do you feel like it's more of like a cranial sacral thing versus the actual angles of the teeth, or how does that just kind of fit into your work?
Well, teeth are challenging because there's different paradigms of thought with the how to even do dentistry. And um, I used a natural balance dentist for the 20 years I had horses. My last horse I had just recently passed away. Um, but if a vet looks at their mouth, they'll say, "Oh, they've got sharp points," because they are trained to file down the cutting edge, which is the outside edge of the molars. But that takes away their cutting edge, and sometimes they go into the first layer of enamel. And what that also does is flatten the molars too much, flattens the table angle too much. And I have a skull of a friend of mine's horse who was done by a vet who specialized in dentistry. And the lower molars on this horse are so flat and smooth like glass, and the upper molars have more of their natural angle on them. And then his incisors were had a shear, and he ended up dying because he kept fracturing teeth. And the teeth, he had to have a surgery where they went in and cut a hole in his bone to take out tooth fragments. And the dentist that I'm actually going to do a webinar with him, me and another cranial practitioner, Emma. He talks about that, how if their molars are not lining up, then they'll get like a slab fracture, I think they call it. So when and it's hard because you want to trust the professional who's doing your horse's teeth, but so many teeth are not. I find it too. They're being overfloated in the molars, and they're not addressing the incisors correctly. And also they can have correct dentistry, but the biomechanics of their jaw is off just from their, from whatever, a pullback while tied that never got addressed, or the 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 bridles are too tight or whatever. They have too much pressure on their head, which can throw off the mechanics of their jaw. And a good dentist they'll remember your horse's bite pattern, and they'll be able to determine if the bite pattern has changed. And I've gotten feedback from a couple of dentists that noticed that their horse's teeth were erupting faster, and it was when they started to get craniosacral work. So that the craniosacral work helps their teeth erupt faster, from what I'm told, and it helps the biomechanics of their jaw so they can wear their teeth down more evenly. But at the same time, if they're getting overfloated and their incisors are not getting addressed or getting addressed properly, then it's an uphill battle. But there's a dentist in my area that I've always recommended, but then I've had vets come in and say, um, a lot of drama, like there's too much tooth or too sharp, whatever their, terms they're using to scare the person and getting a more extreme power float. I have heard from the dentist that I talked to that when the dentists that go through the more traditional dental school are doing a better job, they're not taking off as much as they used to. And I think the vets out of UC Davis are learning a little bit better, because I hear that they're not taking off as much. They're balancing the molars a little better. And And not all natural balance dentists are good either. Some of them don't get far enough back, so it's hard. Dentistry is a hard one to find someone that you can trust.
Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of awareness, and the teeth are inside of the head. And I just see, I think it's such an important topic, and I really appreciate you talking about it in such a clear and true way, because I feel like there's a lot of like gray areas around dentistry, and we all hear about farriers and how it's hard to find a good farrier, and there's so many different ways that you could trim a foot or shoe a foot, and there's so much focus on feet, and yet I feel like 9 times out of 10, the horses are suffering in silence because they have bad dentistry and they have headaches, and their headaches are so bad that it's causing the whole body to get locked up. And then the feet are a byproduct. And of course, there's so much that goes into it. But it's so interesting to me how there's not a lot of literature on teeth. There's so many online studies around feet and self-trimming, and people are, interested in trimming feet and what they should look like and the angles. And I see so many different Facebook groups and things about feet and bodies and bones and all these other things. And it's so interesting to me that no one is talking about the teeth, and they eat 24/7.
Yeah, and their jaw it's like the foundation of their skull. And if that's thrown off, if their TMJ cannot slide in all the directions it's meant to slide, then it's going to throw everything off in their whole body. You can almost, I can almost look at a horse and tell if they've been overfloated. And it's the horses that have a hard time putting muscle on, or, well, putting weight on in general. My horse, I had, at one point, long time ago, when I first moved to Texas, and I mean, it's kind of a long story, but I had to put my horses somewhere because they were at my grandparents' farm, and my grandmother died. And so I had to find a place for my horses. And I had a friend who wanted, um, it was interesting how she just reached out to me the moment I was like, what am I going to do with my horses? And my phone rings, and she says, I need a couple of horses for, as a companion for my horse. And so I took my two horses there, or two of my horses there. And I I told her I have a dentist, and I had my little things that I didn't want done. And I guess she had her vet out, and I didn't find this out till later. And he power floated my two horses, and they had never been power floated. They had only had a natural balance dentist. And 3 months later, one of them died, and the other one looked like complete hell. He was a big draft cross, and he was skin and bones, and his coat, he had this dark, shiny coat, and his coat looked like the color of straw. And his fur had grown about 4 inches long. I mean, he looked awful. I thought, does he have Cushing's? I couldn't understand why he looked so bad. And she didn't know why my other one died. He just, in the middle of the night, just died. And the person who picked him up said he thinks it was a impaction colic. And about a year later, when I had my dentist out, she said his teeth look like shale, that rock that kind of peels. And I said, what causes that? And she said, the heat from a power float. And yeah, and she said his teeth were really off. She couldn't understand what had happened. And so that's when I realized what had happened to him. And he recovered, and it took probably 3 years for his teeth to get back to normal, but my other one didn't do so well from it. So it is hard, and you have to really learn it yourself. You have to learn the different, I tell people to really understand the different paradigms of dentistry. And some people will say, oh, put your hand, they'll have the speculum in and they'll let you feel in there. But how many people really know what they're feeling for? I didn't all the years I did that. I didn't know what they were supposed to feel like, or but one thing to look for in a dentist is, like I said before, they should follow the bite pattern of your horse. They should know what's normal and what's not. And they also should really take their time opening the speculum. And every time their hand comes out of their mouth, they should be closing the speculum every single time. They shouldn't be in there that long. And I see people, I've been to barns where the dentist and the vet are sitting there having a conversation with this drugged up horse with their mouth with the speculum cranked open as far as it'll open. And they're just sitting there chatting while the horse is there with their mouth open. So those kind of things, I would say, don't let them do that. And try to find somebody who's a little more conscientious about closing it. And I mean, you can look at their incisors and see if they're straight. Their incisors should stay. I think it's Spencer LaFleur that says they should stay when a horse is 5 or 6, their incisors are at the perfect length. They should stay that length for the rest of their life. Like, they shouldn't get long and start sloping forward. They need to stay short. I have a picture of my horse. He was 18 and his incisors were perfect. And so, yeah, it's hard. It's a hard one to find.
I feel so lucky. I had really no understanding of dentistry or anything for a lot of years. I would just have the vet float my horses, and then I ended up with a horse who was very young and he had parrot mouth. And so we had a dentist come and he would work on him quite often. And then I had shifted to moving out here, and one of my old students went and became a natural balance. And it was like such a world of difference. Like, and you talk about the speculum, and it's like every couple, seconds or minutes, even when she goes and closes it, glows it. And I was like, yeah, because now when I see people that have, because we have a small boarding facility, and I see people that have their vets out, and I just watch it, and I'm like, you don't know until you know. And once you do, it's like, oh my gosh, like it's just such a vast difference. And I just remember my horses would be, yeah, like you said, everybody'd be sitting around and the horses like forever, and they're talking and talking and talking. And it was just, you didn't know until I had her out, and I was like, wow, that's like often, very, very often that's being closed and then reopened super slow and very, it's like a totally different experience. You'd think that we as humans would be more understanding, since most people are so sensitive about their own dental work and what it is to have people in your mouth and how vulnerable it is and that entire experience. Yet we're like, oh, this is the way it is, where it's like, well, not actually. So
Yeah,
Brittany had a question about, do you have any place to send people for, resources and how to like find a reputable dentist, or is that just too vast to be able to narrow down?
it's pretty vast. I When I was in California, I liked Jerry Schmidt. He's a little bit like Sneaky Snake going through the states, because you have to be careful, with certain laws and certain areas. He also will take on apprentices, and he's really good. And the woman who comes to Texas, her name is Kristen Dennis. She lives in Maryland, I think. And I used her when I moved here. And I'm sure there's a lot of great dentists out there. I just don't even know. I wouldn't even know how to tell someone how to find someone good other than watch them
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
See, do they palpate the TMJ to see if they're sore? Do they knock them out when they sedate them, or do they just lightly sedate them to get to the back? Um, Things you can look for with your own horse is watch how they chew. There's, I did a video of my horses standing at a round bale, and I timed how long each one took to switch sides because they'll chew on one side for a while, and then my horses, it was anywhere from like 9 to 16 minutes. Then they'd switch and use the other side. When they grab grass or hay, watch how do they break it off? Do they have that nice um can they tear it off and use like the their upper cervicals is where they use to tear the hay or the grass, or are they just kind of picking at it and pulling it backwards, or pulling their head backwards. You can also palpate their masseters and their temporalis muscles and see, are they even? Those are the two muscles on their forehead. Are they overdeveloped, or are they nice and even? Are they tight? Is one side bigger than the other? The masseters should feel like a healthy, thick muscle, but a lot of horses, they feel like rocks. Or people don't even realize there's a muscle there. They think it's just their jawbone. They're so hard.
Mhm.
Um, you can feel on the inside of their jaw. So the masseters are on the outside, and then right on the inside of the jaw is the pterygoid. And you can feel up in there and feel, or see if they're tender, see if their hyoid feels like it's in the center. Because if you feel up there, sometimes there'll be more space in between the inside of the jaw on one side than the other. And the tighter space is where there's a come up, is where
I
the
know the thing.
the tighter space might be where the hyoid might be pulled off to that side. That side of the TMJ might be tighter. So, I mean, you can understand a lot just by watching your horse chew. A lot of horses have a side they prefer to chew on, just like people. It's good for us to pay attention to what side we chew on as well and try to change our own patterns up.
Definitely. Thanks for explaining all of that because I feel like there's a lot of people giving their power away. Like you saying these things to me at this point in my journey feels like common sense. But I think a lot of people forget, like, oh, yeah, I can touch my horse's face and I can notice these imbalances and then I can correlate these imbalances to something else. And I know for me, I'm like an avid learner and I'm always encouraging other people like learn as much as you can because you're not going to be able to have those conversations with your professionals if you feel like you don't know enough to have the conversations, and then your horses kind of suffer in silence because fear keeps a lot of people from speaking up from their horses and having boundaries and all of those things. And it's just so interesting to me how there's not a lot of literature around even just self-studying teeth. There's like not a lot of literature. A friend of mine is really interested in dentistry right now, and she had to get a book from overseas. Like there wasn't a good like recommended book in the US, and that blows my mind.
I know, and it's not like feet, we can go take a trim clinic or go take a hoof dissection clinic. But teeth, there's nothing. And I tell people, if just start asking questions, and listen to your own intuition. If the question does not sit well, then maybe seek other professionals. but it's okay to
Mhm.
ask questions and and pay attention to how your body feels from the answer of that question. Is it somebody who really cares and wants to explain, or are they just giving you a piped answer, hoping you'll stop asking them questions? But it is
Definitely.
hard.
Thanks for speaking to that topic because I think it's such an important one, and I'm always like talking to people about teeth and how, and then it's kind of unfortunate because at least with craniosacral you can help them a little bit and there's awareness brought to it, and I'm sure, and speaking to like connecting with the heart like you were saying earlier, I do feel like there is a mass shift in the industry where people are becoming more compassionate. They're seeing horses as individuals. People are working towards opening their hearts and seeing the connectedness and taking a softer approach. And so hopefully with that is going to come um more interest in things like craniosacral and trusting intuition and animal communication and honoring ourselves and our bodies. And I think there's a lot of energy. Maybe it's just an Amber and I circle actually, because I went outside of that circle recently and I was like, oh God, let me back in. Like I forgot people are still like this. People still talk this way about their horses. But in our circle, at least, there is a big shift. And something that I learned recently from one of my own horses is I was trying to figure out how to assess like what was mine, what was theirs, how to trust my intuition. And they were like, truth has no emotion. It just is. So if you're feeling something from me and you're getting wildly emotional, you need to really feel into like if that's truth or not. And I've been really playing around with that. So this whole conversation has just been awesome.
Yeah, I see a shift too, because when I first started this journey, nobody had heard of craniosacral. And trying to explain it is not always easy. I kind of read the person I'm talking to and explain it from that what I think their perspective could understand. But it seems like it's definitely more people are seeking it out. People want to learn it. I think it's great. I do feel like there's a shift as well.
Definitely. And so if people want to learn, I'm just looking at the time and I want to be like really
Oh, goes
respectful
fast.
of your time. It does. It goes fast. I know. And I was going to go into the whole topic of like, oh, well, these poor vets are like overworked. And yet, like, the laws make it to where, like, there's a reason why there's not a lot of natural balanced dentistry because of all of these things. And I'm like, no, we're going to have to save that conversation for another time.
Yeah, I do
So,
agree.
if,
There's not enough vets and they are overworked. They don't have time to
mhm,
read up on what's new and all that. So they just get through their day.
mhm, definitely. So, if people want to find out more about you or your offerings or your classes, your webinars, all of that stuff, where should they go?
I have a what's it called? Facebook. That thing. I have a Facebook business page. It's called Equine Balance with Shea Stewart, with or by, I can't remember. Um,
We'll put the
and
link in the notes.
okay. And then my website is equinebalance.net. And I try to keep those up to date with whatever I'm doing. Um, but those are my two. There's an Instagram. I don't go on there that much, but I think I have it to where things get posted there. I don't know. It's some of the stuff I didn't grow up in the technology age, so some of it gets even the business page gets confusing to me. So sometimes I miss messages, but if I do, just message me again and I'll answer.
Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. I know people are going to really benefit a lot from hearing all of your perspectives and stuff. And I totally appreciate it. And if you ever want to do a part two, we can just keep going. I think every time we have a guest on, we're like, oh, it's an hour already. Like we could quite literally go again if there's so many things to talk about. So we really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation, and I always enjoy talking about these things. So anytime I would love to come back and do it again.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.